All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, The Verge is out with a stranger-than-fiction accounting of Taiwanese conglomerate Foxconn's exploits in Wisconsin, and it really is a sad and frankly sordid tale. At bottom, it's a story of how politicians and corporations use working people like pawns in a big game where they always win, and workers and ordinary tax-paying Americans always lose. It's all one giant con that will end with no price paid for anyone except the workers who bother to get their hopes up about a new economic lifeline. Kudos to journalist Josh Zieza for this fantastic piece of journalism. Highly recommend you read the whole thing top to bottom, as I will only be able to hit some of the highlights here. So, you might remember, back in 2017, days after Trump's inauguration, Foxconn CEO and founder Terry Gou announced that he was interested in a massive investment in America to the tune of $7 billion, which he said could create between 30 and 50,000 jobs. For Gou, this was a great way to curry favor with the new Trump administration and a potential way to have influence over the direction of a trade war with China that could greatly impact Foxconn's bottom line. The Trump administration and Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, sensing a big political win here, jumped at the opportunity, quickly setting up a meeting to iron out all the details. Ultimately, what came from those initial conversations was a deal announced to major fanfare that would include $4 billion in Wisconsin state tax and other goodies in exchange for Foxconn's pledge to build a major manufacturing hub in southeastern Wisconsin, employing some 13,000 workers. They even came up with an evocative name for the region, Wisconn Valley. President Trump embraced the Foxconn project as a way of proving how he was making good on promises to blue-collar workers. So, 2018, Trump attended a big groundbreaking at the Foxconn site in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, where he called the plant the eighth wonder of the world. Here's what he had to say.
18 months ago, this was a field, and now it's one of the most advanced places of any kind you'll see anywhere in the world. It's incredible. And I want to be thanking Terry Gou, chairman of Foxconn and a friend of mine, one of the most successful businessmen in the world. Very few people even close. And I want to thank him for investing in Wisconsin and investing in the United States. And this is just the beginning. I know, Terry, this is just the beginning. This is one of the largest plants in the world. And when you think in terms of 20 million feet, if you build in Manhattan a 1 million-foot building, that's a very big building. They don't get much bigger. And here you're talking about more. Think of it, more than 20 million feet. And that's probably going to be a minimal number. So I'm thrilled to be here in the Badger State with the hardworking men and women of Foxconn working with you. Moments ago, we broke ground on a plant that will provide jobs for much more than 13,000 Wisconsin workers.
Much more than 13,000. Now, from the beginning, many of us raised a lot of questions about this project. Most glaringly was the price tag. It was massive. Even if it fully lived up to its promise of 13,000 jobs, a $4 billion subsidy meant that Wisconsin taxpayers were paying somewhere around $300,000 per job. But very quickly, more problems came to light. Almost immediately, Foxconn started shifting its promises on what exactly it was going to build and whether it was even going to be manufacturing anything at the massive site or have it serve instead as a research hub. Now, on this front, The Verge reveals new extraordinary details. In fact, Foxconn has never been able to figure out a workable business model, and many of their employees were brought on simply to fill a slot necessary in order to continue to receive state tax subsidies. Josh Zieza writes, rather than the 1,040 people Foxconn intended to hire by the end of 2018 per its contract with the state, or even the 260 needed in order to receive subsidies, an audit found the company had managed to hire only 113. At the Mount Pleasant campus, it had erected a single structure, a 120,000 square foot space, that sat virtually empty. Its very name, the multi-purpose building, seemed non-committal. As for the promised LCD factory, the Fab, Foxconn boasted in a letter that a contractor had moved 4 million cubic yards of dirt. As 2018 came to an end, the company froze budgets and canceled planned career fairs. The project entered a complete stall. And this really is just the tip of the iceberg. The Verge details a pathetic state of affairs on the campus that would actually be hilarious if it wasn't so sad. Elevators that didn't work, employees working without any desks, multicolored golf carts ordered and used for nothing other than races among workers with fake jobs and literally nothing better to do. Foxconn flowed through a dizzying array of schemes to try to make some kind of business venture out of their Wisconsin boondoggle. First, it was large LCD screens, then it was smaller LCD screens. At some point, they workshopped a knockoff WeWork co-working model. Here's The Verge again. Foxconn would spend the next 2 years jumping from idea to idea. Fish farms, exporting ice cream, storing boats, in an increasingly surreal search for some way to generate money from a doomed project. They even considered turning the campus into a tree farm to supply trees to this bizarre geodesic dome that they had constructed for no purpose other than to demonstrate that they were in fact doing something. It all sounds quite literally like complete insanity. Insanity driven, and this is the crucial part, by the Trumpian politics of caring only about a theatrical display of concern for American workers. And that was, in fact, the most devastating part of this piece. In order to make their hiring quotas, Foxconn engaged in what The Verge describes as a pump and dump scheme, pumping up their workforce with end-of-year hires, only to lay those same workers off in the new year, toying with people's lives as part of a big political game. Foxconn's fake manufacturing hub in Wisconsin will be a footnote ultimately when the history of the Trump administration is written. But it is as perfect an analogy as any for the promise and utter failure that has eroded his political prospects and left workers with little other than some pro-blue-collar rhetorical flourishes. Trump talked a big game here, made a whole lot of promises, put on a great show, but didn't actually care about the end result to these workers and their communities. It's a pattern that has played out again and again in this administration. You remember the big carrier deal at the beginning of the Trump era when he made a big show of saving carrier jobs from going overseas by pressuring Indiana into giving that corporation a big tax break to keep those jobs local? Well, after he'd left and the cameras were off, many of the manufacturing jobs still moved overseas. Overall, according to a report from Good Jobs Nation, the first year of his administration saw over 142,000 jobs shipped overseas and federal contracting jobs offshored at a rate 3 times higher than what was happening under President Obama. His corporate tax cut actually incentivized offshoring, and even before coronavirus, the manufacturing sector was technically in a recession. As you look at the polling from Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota and Pennsylvania, remember these stories, the big promises and the failed results. This president spoke to the pain of American carnage, and then he went right ahead and created more of his own. And Sagar, this report was
damning.
Stunning.
Damning.
This was supposed to be a massive game changer for the state and for the workers of this state. Too. And it could have been. And not just for the 13,000 who were directly employed, but the idea is you have this whole supply chain. Suppliers came in and they strung them along too, and they thought they were going to get deals that ultimately never materialized. It's mind-blowing. And look, a lot of times, and this is something that's worth covering extensively, when these sort of like tax incentive deals are made by governors, they very rarely pan out to actually be a worthwhile use of money. But I've never seen anything on the scale of this level of failure. $4 billion, and they've basically done nothing.
It's a total boondoggle. And look, this is actually where rhetoric has to meet up with the hard work. That's the thing about Carrier. Carrier will, I actually remember the Carrier deal. I thought it was one of the, in retrospect, I think this is what Ross Douthat says, it was the best moment of the Trump presidency. Even though he wasn't even president. He was the president-elect whenever it happened. When he saved those jobs, and he went there and he's like, I saved them, you're going to stay here. I was like, oh my God, he's actually doing it. And so were a lot of people. But then he got distracted. I mean, got caught up by Paul Ryan and Mitch and got eaten by the washing machine, didn't even just seem to care. And what ended up happening? What did Carrier do? They default to, they're like, he's not paying attention. Ship them all out. Fire him. Same thing on Foxconn. I don't put a lot past Scott Walker, but the way that this is supposed to work is you give them the tax break and then you smack them if they don't deliver. Well, so lo and behold, they always get the tax break on the front end and they never get the smacks whenever they don't deliver. That is the difficult part of actually running a government. And this is the thing that he and many of the people who work for him were just never interested in doing. Mm-hmm. To the extent that there were people who were interested in running a government who worked for him, they didn't really believe in government. They'd be like, oh, well, it's not up to the government to tell Foxconn how to run its business. I'm like, well, we just gave him $4 billion billion in tax credits.
Right.
So actually, yes, it is up on us to tell them what to do. So you can see this is a very simple way in which politicians in many places get played. At the time, it's funny because I support this type of stuff in principle. This is what basic industrial policy looks like. And a lot of liberals were like, oh, you should never give tax breaks. It's almost like a weird libertarian argument. No, that's BS and stupid. But what it shows is that if you're going to do it, it has to be followed through on. And he didn't follow through. Look, it's a total boondoggle. If you lose Wisconsin, I'm sure this certainly has part of it. The guy won Wisconsin. The first president since Republican since Ronald Reagan to do so. He tapped into something there, and he just seems to have forgotten it.
And so now as we come down to the wire, a lot of the dynamics of this race obviously are being determined by coronavirus.
Yeah.
But I would argue that these types of decisions not only laid the groundwork, but they provide an insight into what would ultimately be his failures in coronavirus, where it's a similar thing. Like, all the liberals who were so afraid of he's going to be the authoritarian and he's going to take control and he's going to be command and control. Like, if he had actually done a little more of that.
Oh, he'd be leading in the polls.
If he had been more command and control when it came to Foxconn, if he had been more command and control when it came to coronavirus and getting people the economic stimulus they need and making sure that the country was doing what it needed to do to get past this virus, which we have still never done, he would actually be in a lot better position right now than he is.
At the New York Times Siena poll, it came out this morning. They did specific issues. A national mask mandate has 60% approval rating. 60%, okay? Why are you on the other side of that? I'm not even saying it's constitutional. Probably not. And as far as I can tell, Biden's been like, yeah, I'll mandate them on federal property. Which isn't a real mask mandate, but it doesn't matter. It's about setting an example. That's all people wanted this whole time.
Yeah. And, you know, it actually is funny because, like, a lot of things aren't really fully enforced. I mean, you think about, like, speed limits. They're only partially enforceable.
Right.
But a lot of people obey rules and laws and follow, like, based on public shaming and public sort of coercion. So if you see all of your leaders united along doing one thing, most Americans are ultimately going to fall in line because of that sort of social cohesion factor. But yeah, I just looked at this and I thought it was a perfect analogy for the failures of this administration, pushing coronavirus aside. Like, the groundwork was laid with his lack of actual care and concern to really get things done. He loved the show. He loved the big groundbreaking, the big ribbon cut. He loved all of that. But when it actually came to making sure that these workers' lives were made better, it was nowhere to be seen.
Got to put in the work.
Still to come, socialists in Bolivia are celebrating a huge victory there. DC Bureau Chief of The Intercept, Ryan Grimm, is going to tell us more when Rising returns.